The classroom was quiet, too quiet. Every eye was on the blackboard where Mr. Carlton, the smug physics teacher, was scribbling equations like his mind was a magic box of impenetrable formulas. His sharp, calculated handwriting filled the space, almost daring anyone to challenge him. The room buzzed with low murmurs from the students, their glances flicking to the back corner where Ilara Whittaker sat, unnoticed, tucked into the shadows of the classroom. Ilara's eyes never left the equations. It wasn't that she had to try hard to follow. She understood them effortlessly. Math, formulas, physics. They made sense in a way that the world didn't. But no one in the room knew that. No one knew her. Her fingers moved quietly over her notebook, scribbling out calculations and designs of her own. Designs that no one else could see, but she didn't mind. Being invisible was easier than drawing attention to herself, until, of course, Mr. Carlton spoke. "All right, Ilara," Mr. Carlton's voice rang out, his smirk cutting through the tension in the room like a blade. "I'd like to see you solve this." He pointed at the malfunctioning engine on the desk in front of the classroom. A new challenge, an impossible one. The engine had baffled everyone else. It wasn't just any mechanical failure. It was complex, entangled with problems that seemed to defy logic. The most advanced minds in the class had spent days on it, only to back away in frustration. Everyone knew what was coming. A ripple of laughter passed through the students. They were waiting to see Ilara, the shy girl who was always buried in books, fail. Mr. Carlton knew how to play the game. He thought it was a joke. She was the joke. But Ilara didn't move. She sat still, her heart racing, but her hands steady. "It's just another test," she told herself. "Another chance to prove them wrong." "Ilara," Mr. Carlton's voice rose with mock amusement, "I'm sure you're more than capable of figuring this out. After all, what's an engine to someone who spends their time buried in numbers, right?" The class chuckled. The mockery burned, but Ilara remained silent. Her gaze never wavered from the engine. There was something else here, something deeper. The engine. It wasn't just a mechanical puzzle. It was her chance to stand tall, to show everyone, even Mr. Carlton, what she was capable of. The class waited, the air thick with expectation. Ilara stood up slowly, her movements calm, controlled. She walked toward the engine, her fingers lightly brushing over the metal. A wave of shock rippled through the room. The engine was silent. It was still, but Ilara wasn't just examining it. She was thinking, connecting dots no one else had seen. She'd already solved it. She could see the problem. The capacitor. Everyone had missed it, every last one of them, including Mr. Carlton. Ilara's mind raced through the calculations in her head, running the numbers with precision. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small replacement component and went to work. She was methodical, quick, confident. The engine clicked as the capacitor slid into place. Ilara stepped back and glanced up at the class. The room had gone eerily quiet. Her fingers didn't tremble anymore. They were steady, focused. She wasn't just fixing an engine, she was fixing everything. The mockery, the doubt, the sneers. Mr. Carlton stepped forward. His eyes flickered between the engine and Ilara. What was happening? The hum of the engine had started. The once stubborn machine purred smoothly, its power evident. The students were still frozen, too stunned to speak. Mr. Carlton's voice broke the silence, but it was different now, slower, hesitant. "Ilara, how did you—" "Ilara solved it," someone in the back whispered. "Impossible," another muttered. And then it hit. Ilara didn't just fix the engine, she had improved it. The math, the equations, everything she had studied, all of her quiet, relentless pursuit of knowledge had come together in that moment. She had gone beyond the solution. She had re-engineered the engine's efficiency. Her genius wasn't just theoretical anymore. She'd proven it, in front of them all. Mr. Carlton's face turned pale. He stared at the engine, clearly trying to grasp what had just happened, but there was nothing to grasp. The truth was undeniable, as irrefutable as the formulas on the board. The students were silent, their disbelief turning into awe. Ilara hadn't just fixed the engine. She had broken the expectation. She had shattered the limits they placed on her. Ilara smiled quietly to herself. She knew this wasn't just about the engine. It was about something bigger, something that had been buried for too long. She was done hiding. The world would see her now. The school bell rang, a sharp chime that echoed down the empty halls. Inside room 204, the silence felt heavy. Ilara Whitaker sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tapping against the wooden surface. The engine, her victory from earlier, sat on the teacher's desk, still humming gently. The classroom had been dismissed for lunch, but Ilara couldn't shake the weight of the eyes that followed her as she exited. She hadn't expected to feel this sudden, suffocating attention. She had gone from being invisible to noticed, and she hated it. She wasn't ready for the spotlight. She had only wanted to prove herself. Now all she could think about was the smug look on Mr. Carlton's face when she fixed that engine. The door opened, breaking her concentration. Mr. Carlton walked in, his steps deliberate and slow. His expression was unreadable. He didn't speak at first, only walked to his desk and glanced at the engine, then back at Ilara. "Ilara," he said, his voice laced with forced calm. "We need to talk." Ilara's heart skipped. She'd been expecting this. She braced herself, straightening up in her seat. "You did well today." Mr. Carlton's voice was almost kind, but there was a strange sharpness behind it. "I'll give you that. But don't mistake this for some miracle. The engine was just a malfunctioning piece of machinery. Anyone could have fixed it." "Anyone?" Ilara's voice was quieter than she meant it to be, but she couldn't help it. "Anyone could have." "You fixed it?" "Yes," Mr. Carlton said with a smug grin, as though this conversation was beneath him. "Sure, it looks like you fixed it. But it doesn't mean much, Ilara. You were lucky, that's all." He leaned in closer, his breath slightly too close to her face. "The real test? That's something I'll decide." Ilara held his gaze, swallowing the frustration building in her chest. She hadn't expected Mr. Carlton to accept her win with grace. But this was arrogance, dressed up as authority. The room was quiet again. Ilara could hear her own pulse in her ears. She knew what this was. He was afraid that a student, she, could outthink him, afraid that the truth she had uncovered, not just about the engine, but about his own inadequacy, would bring his whole facade crashing down. "Fine," Ilara said, the words leaving her mouth before she could stop them. "What's the real test, then?" Mr. Carlton's smirk deepened. "Tomorrow, after lunch, I'll bring in something more complex. Something that'll prove you're not some lucky girl." He leaned back and turned to leave, but paused. "You'll see. It won't be so easy this time. I'll be watching." Ilara sat there, her thoughts racing. The truth of the engine hadn't been about luck. It had been about understanding, the knowledge that Mr. Carlton couldn't fathom. But that didn't matter to him. No, this wasn't just about fixing machines. This was about something bigger, something more personal. She could feel it now. This wasn't going to end with a single victory. She wasn't just proving her intelligence. She was proving her worth. The next day came faster than expected, the room filling again with the heavy air of expectation. Mr. Carlton had set the stage. A new engine sat in the center of the desk, its wiring exposed, its complex system taunting her. Ilara stood near the front, the classroom quiet, save for the rustling of notebooks and pencils. Mr. Carlton stepped forward, his usual smugness in full display. "Let's see if yesterday's miracle was a fluke," he said. "Fix this, and we'll talk. Fail, and I'll be happy to show you that theory still trumps your instincts." Ilara's hand tightened on the desk. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about proving she was right. It was about showing the world, and Mr. Carlton, that her mind was capable of far more than what they had ever given her credit for. Her eyes locked on the engine. "Here we go," Ilara muttered. Under her breath, the classroom fell into a tense silence. Mr. Carlton's eyes never left her, the challenge laid bare in front of her. But Ilara didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, letting the familiar rhythm of numbers and logic flow through her. She knew this. She could feel the solution in her hands. She didn't need to talk her way through this. She just needed to do it. Her fingers moved, quick and sure, dismantling the engine, her mind calculating, adjusting, processing with precise focus. She wasn't racing against the clock. She was racing against the doubt that had been placed on her from the start. Ilara's thoughts narrowed to one point. There. A problem with the capacitor. It had caused the malfunction. A simple mistake, one that had gone unnoticed by everyone else. She knew exactly how to fix it. A minute passed. The engine hummed to life. The classroom was dead silent. Mr. Carlton blinked, stepping closer to the desk. His mouth moved, but no words came out. He couldn't fathom it. Ilara looked up, standing tall as she placed the fixed engine back down. Her eyes met his. "Done, I think," Ilara said, her voice carrying through the room. "The real test is over, don't you?" The room held its breath. Mr. Carlton's face flushed, his smugness deflating in an instant. He turned to leave, muttering something under his breath, but Ilara didn't care. She'd just proved everything she needed to, and the best part, this was just the beginning. The hum of the engine still lingered in the air, like the remnants of a victorious song. Ilara Whittaker sat in her seat, her fingers still gripping the edge of the desk, her mind racing. The challenge had been simple in theory. Solve the impossible. Engine, prove her worth. But the weight of what she had just done was heavier than she anticipated. It was only when she looked up that she realized how quiet the room had become. The other students, once eager to see her fail, now stared in disbelief, their eyes wide with shock. Mr. Carlton, standing by the engine that was now purring smoothly, had gone silent too. His once smug expression had been replaced with something Ilara couldn't quite name. Defeat, confusion. It was a strange thing to see in the teacher who'd held all the power, the one who had used his authority to dismiss her before. Now all of a sudden, the power had shifted. The bell rang, signaling the end of class. The students filed out, some in a daze, others muttering under their breath. Ilara gathered her things slowly, avoiding their eyes. She could feel their gazes, their disbelief. They weren't used to seeing the quiet girl from the back of the room suddenly step into the spotlight. Their assumptions about her being upended. But one person wasn't leaving. Mr. Carlton stood there, arms folded, his sharp gaze on Ilara. She could feel his eyes on the back of her neck, heavy with something unreadable. She wanted to ignore him, to let this moment be over, but there was no escaping it now. "Ilara," Mr. Carlton said, his voice low, "we need to talk." She turned to face him, her breath steady despite the tension running through her veins. "About what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper but firm. That, he gestured toward the engine, was impressive. "I'll give you that, but you think fixing a piece of machinery is enough to change your place here?" His eyes narrowed, and there was a sharpness in his words that made Ilara's stomach turn. "This isn't just about fixing engines. You'll need more than quick hands to survive here. You'll need real knowledge. You've shown you can read a book, but can you truly think in the real world?" Ilara stood still, the weight of his words pushing against her. He still doesn't get it. Her mind raced. She could feel the gears turning. She wasn't just some lab experiment to be dismissed. She wasn't going to let him reduce her to a label. She had spent too long hiding in the background, too long keeping quiet. Now she was in control. "You're wrong," Ilara said, her voice steady. "It wasn't about fixing an engine, Mr. Carlton. It was about understanding it, about seeing what was right in front of me that everyone else missed. But if you think that's all I can do, if you think that's all I am, then I guess we'll have to test it again, won't we?" His lips curled into a tight smile, but there was no humor in it. "You'll get another chance, tomorrow, but I'm not handing you anything, Ilara. You'll have to earn it." Ilara nodded, a spark of defiance in her chest. "I already have." Mr. Carlton didn't respond, only turning to leave, his shoes clicking sharply against the floor. Ilara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The classroom felt different now, quieter, somehow emptier, but it wasn't just the space that had changed. It was her. As she walked toward the door, she heard a voice behind her, a student, his tone filled with uncertainty. You really know your stuff, huh? Elara turned, meeting the eyes of one of her classmates. She nodded once, but didn't say anything. As she stepped outside, the weight of her victory began to sink in. This wasn't just about the engine, it was about everything. For the first time, she felt what it was like to stand tall, to walk with the knowledge that she could take on whatever challenge came next. But that was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Mr. Carlton had promised another test, and Elara wasn't the type to back down. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. The next day came too quickly, but Elara was ready. She had spent the night running over formulas, pulling out every bit of knowledge she could from her books and notes. It wasn't just about mechanics. It was about strategy, about understanding her opponent, about knowing how to read what was in front of her and what it would take to solve it. When she entered the classroom, Mr. Carlton was already waiting. A new, far more complicated machine on the desk in front of him. A challenge. "You think you can fix this?" he asked, his tone cold, but there was a flicker of something else beneath it. Elara couldn't quite tell if it was doubt or fear. She didn't reply right away. Instead, she walked to the desk and leaned over the machine, taking it in. It was more intricate than yesterday's engine, but that only fueled Elara's excitement. This was her element. This was where she thrived. The room grew tense as the clock ticked on. The silence was thick, every student waiting for her to fail. But Elara didn't care about them. She had already proven something far more important to herself. Elara's fingers began to move, tracing the parts of the machine, mentally calculating, analyzing. She already knew what the problem was, but the real test wasn't just fixing the problem. It was about making sure Mr. Carlton knew who was in control now. Her mind raced, moving faster than the mechanics in front of her. This is it. Let's finish this. With a final adjustment, Elara turned the machine on. It hummed to life. Perfectly. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Done," she said, meeting Mr. Carlton's gaze. His face was unreadable, but she could see the flicker of something there, a spark of disbelief. The room was silent again. No one expected this. Not this time. "Is that all you've got?" Elara's voice rang through the classroom, sharp. And sure, Mr. Carlton stood frozen for a moment before he turned on his heel and walked away, his silence louder than any words. Elara didn't need to hear him speak. She had already won. The room, once filled with sneers and whispers, was now filled with something else. Respect. And for the first time, Elara Whittaker stood in the spotlight, not as a student, but as a force. Elara Whittaker sat in the back of the classroom, the hum of her thoughts louder than the muted conversations around her. The memory of yesterday's victory still clung to her like the faint buzz of electricity in the air. She had done it again. The engine, the challenge, the mockery. And now the students who had once mocked her were whispering in hushed tones. Some were impressed, others still doubtful. Elara didn't care. Not really. Not anymore. She had proved herself. But Mr. Carlton, he wouldn't let it end there. Elara's eyes flickered up to the front of the classroom, where Mr. Carlton stood, his back turned to her. He was writing something on the board, but Elara could feel the weight of his presence, the tension in the room that hadn't dissipated since her last challenge. She wasn't afraid anymore, but she wasn't naive either. She knew the battle wasn't over. Mr. Carlton wasn't one to accept defeat. If anything, his silence was the calm before the storm. "All right," Mr. Carlton said, spinning around to face the class, his usual smug expression plastered on his face. "Let's make something clear. Elara Whittaker's little victory yesterday," he emphasized the words with a flick of his wrist, "was nothing more than a fluke." The room shifted uncomfortably. The class was on edge. Some students leaned forward, waiting for more, while others exchanged glances, uncertain where this was headed. Elara's pulse quickened, but she refused to show it. Her hands clenched beneath the desk, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the wood. "This wasn't over, I'll be the first to admit," Mr. Carlton continued. "Elara managed to get lucky with her fix. But let's see if luck holds up. Today, we're going to test her once again. This time, it's not about solving a mechanical issue. This time, we'll test her mind." Ilara raised an eyebrow. She knew what this was. This wasn't about fixing an engine. This was about humiliation. The room fell silent as Mr. Carlton turned and revealed what was set up on the desk, a series of complex math equations, their symbols jumbled together like a cryptic puzzle. Her heart sank as she saw what he had prepared. The chalkboard was covered in intricate formulas, all designed to challenge her understanding of physics, algebra, and advanced calculus. They weren't just any problems. These were the kind of equations that made even the best students groan in defeat. Ilara's mind raced. She knew every one of those formulas. She could solve them in her sleep. But what Mr. Carlton didn't understand, what he couldn't understand, was that this wasn't about math. This was about power, about control, about his fragile ego. "I expect Ilara to come up to the front and solve this," Mr. Carlton announced. "I'll give her 5 minutes. Let's see if she can keep up with the rest of the class." A challenge, but not just any challenge. This was the kind of challenge designed to make her look weak in front of her classmates. Designed to remind everyone that no matter how brilliant Ilara was, Mr. Carlton still held the power. The class was looking at her now, some with hope, others with doubt. Ilara could feel their eyes burning into her skin, but it was his words that stung. Fluke. She rose from her seat slowly, her heart hammering in her chest, but her steps were firm. Her eyes locked onto Mr. Carlton, and for a split second she could see the satisfaction in his eyes, as if he were already anticipating her failure. But Ilara wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. She walked up to the front of the room, ignoring the murmurs behind her, and faced the chalkboard. The silence was suffocating. The weight of every pair of eyes on her was almost too much to bear, but Ilara didn't flinch. She had faced worse, far worse. This was nothing. Her fingers grasped the chalk as her mind went into overdrive. Equation 1, solve for x. Equation 2, simplify the logarithms. Equation 3, use the derivative rule. Ilara's hand flew across the board, scratching out the symbols with fluid precision. Her mind was a well-oiled machine, and the answers came to her as easily as breathing. The class had gone completely silent. Ilara's chalk flew faster, her calculations smooth and seamless. 5 minutes, that was all she needed. And as the final equation was solved, Ilara stepped back, her eyes scanning the board. There, in front of the class, were the correct answers. Carlton stood still, his mouth slightly open, his earlier arrogance replaced by a look of genuine disbelief. The room was dead silent, every student frozen in place. Ilara's eyes never left Mr. Carlton. "That's it, the solution." "The math works out," she said, her voice cool, confident and calm. She had done it again, not just solved the problems, but shattered the narrative he had been trying to control. Mr. Carlton blinked, his expression unreadable for a moment. But then he exhaled sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Well then," he said, his voice barely audible, "it seems we've underestimated you, Ilara." A small victory, but it was still a victory. The class slowly began to stir, the tension lifting as the students exchanged glances, some nodding in approval, others still unsure of how to process what had just happened. Ilara took a breath. He couldn't take this from her. She had earned this moment, and as she turned to leave the front of the room, she caught sight of one of her classmates, a boy who had once been one of Mr. Carlton's most vocal supporters. He looked at her with a mix of awe and disbelief. Power had shifted, and Ilara Whittaker wasn't going to let it go. The world had underestimated her once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. Mr. Carlton may have held the power today, but Ilara was no longer the quiet, invisible girl. In the back of the classroom, she was a force, and she wasn't backing down. The hallway buzzed with a new kind of energy. Whispers of Ilara Whittaker's victory were spreading faster than wildfire. Her name was being muttered under breaths, passed between students like a secret that had to be shared. The eyes that had once ignored her now followed her, each glance carrying a mix of awe and disbelief. Ilara kept her head low, eyes on the floor, as she walked to her next class. The last thing she wanted was attention. She hadn't asked for any of this, but something inside her had shifted. She had risen from the back of the room, from being invisible to standing at the front, no longer hiding behind the shadows of her classmates' mockery. And Mr. Carlton, her fingers twitched at her sides, still charged with the electricity of yesterday's challenge. The victory tasted sweet, but something gnawed at her. It wasn't over. Not yet. Ilara sat down in her seat, trying to push the thoughts of Mr. Carlton from her mind. She knew he wouldn't leave it alone. A man like him, one so wrapped up in his own arrogance, didn't lose gracefully. He would come back, and he would dare her again. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp sound of the door slamming shut. Mr. Carlton. He stood at the front of the class, a piece of paper clutched in his hand, his expression one of tight control. His gaze swept over the room, lingering just a moment longer on Ilara before he cleared his throat. "Ilara," he began, his voice colder than the previous day, "let's see if your little victory was truly earned, shall we?" The class fell silent. Ilara could feel their eyes on her. They don't know. They don't know what he's really trying to do." Mr. Carlton held up the sheet of paper, a smug grin curling on his lips. "This," he said, "is a real challenge. Not some simple engine, not some trick. This is what you'll be graded on. The math, the real world. The one you'll have to face when you leave this classroom." He turned the paper around and revealed a dense sheet of math equations, advanced calculus, differential equations, and abstract physics formulas that no one else in the room could understand. Not even Ilara was sure she wanted to dive into them. Ilara's mind raced as she scanned the sheet. It wasn't a test. It was a trap, a test of her limits. "He wants me to fail." Mr. Carlton's voice broke through her thoughts. "You have 5 minutes. Solve it, or admit your brilliance was nothing more than chance." His words dripped with disdain, with a challenge that was anything but academic. Ilara exhaled slowly, but inside, her mind was already working. She wasn't going to let him do this. Not now, not after everything she had proved. 5 minutes. Ilara's voice cut through the silence, her words steady despite the pressure mounting in her chest. "That's not enough time for anyone. I gave you 5 minutes yesterday," Mr. Carlton countered. "Let's see if you can prove your worth again. Or were you just a lucky guess?" His words hit like a punch. Ilara's heartbeat quickened, her thoughts spinning, but then it clicked. This wasn't about solving the problem. This was about proving something bigger. 5 minutes. 5 minutes was all she needed. As the clock began ticking, Ilara felt the room close in on her. She could feel Mr. Carlton's gaze like a burning weight on the back of her neck. She knew he was watching, waiting for her to falter. But Ilara wasn't about to let him win. Not this time. Her eyes swept across the page, instantly seeing the core of the problem. The way the equations intertwined, how they played with each other, the mathematical beauty of it all. She'd seen this before, in her mother's notes. Her hand moved swiftly over the paper, her pencil gliding across the surface as her mind calculated the answers. One equation at a time, she pieced it together, factors, variables, derivatives, all clicking into place as if they were meant to follow her lead. The numbers and formulas became fluid, instinctive, like the rhythm of a song. The ticking clock faded into the background. She couldn't afford to listen to it. Her focus was on one thing and one thing only, solving the puzzle. Ilara's fingers flew, the equations transformed into something clear, simple, even, her solutions pouring out faster than the ticking seconds. She knew every step, every solution, and every twist the problem would take. She wasn't just solving it, she was seeing the future of the equation, feeling its rhythm in her bones. 4 minutes, 3 minutes, the classroom grew heavier, the tension building like a storm waiting to break. 1 minute left. Ilara's pencil hit the paper with a final, precise stroke. She sat back in her chair, breathing deeply, her chest rising and falling. She had done it. She looked up at Mr. Carlton, who was still standing at the front of the room, his arms crossed. His eyes were locked onto her. "Done," Ilara said, her voice unwavering. The class watched, breath held, as Mr. Carlton approached her desk. He snatched the paper from her hands and scanned the answers. The silence was thick with expectation. A tense moment passed, and Ilara could almost hear the beating of her heart in the quiet. Mr. Carlton's eyes widened, his expression faltering. What is this?" His voice trembled for a fraction of a second before he cleared his throat. No, this isn't possible." "I think you'll find the math works out, Mr. Carlton," Ilara replied, her tone calm, but her words cutting through the room like a blade. The tension snapped. "Impossible," he muttered under his breath, taking a step back, clearly unable to comprehend how she had solved it. I think you do," Ilara interrupted, her gaze never leaving him. "You just don't want to admit it." For the first time, the smugness that had defined Mr. Carlton's every move seemed to evaporate. The room remained still, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Ilara had won, and she hadn't just solved a problem. She had exposed Mr. Carlton's arrogance for what it was: fragile, baseless, and now completely undone. The class stared, in stunned silence. But in that moment, Ilara felt something shift. The power had changed hands. She wasn't the overlooked student anymore. She was the one who had proven her worth, not with luck, not by chance, but by sheer brilliance. And Mr. Carlton knew it. The real test had just begun. The classroom buzzed with a strange, almost electric energy the next day. Ilara Whittaker could feel it in the air, the weight of the previous day's challenge still lingering like smoke. Her victory over Mr. Carlton had shifted the balance, in ways she wasn't quite prepared for. No longer was she the quiet girl, hiding in the shadows. She was something else now, and everyone knew it. Her classmates gave her cautious, curious glances as she entered the room, some with admiration, others with lingering doubt. Mr. Carlton was already standing at the front, his back to the class, scribbling equations on the board. The tension between him and Ilara was palpable, an invisible battle raging beneath the surface. Ilara took her seat, but instead of focusing on the notes before her, she found her mind wandering back to what had happened the day before. How could Mr. Carlton, someone so certain of his intellectual superiority, be so wrong? He hadn't taken her victory well. That much was clear. As the bell rang and class began, Ilara's thoughts shifted back to the present. She couldn't afford to get lost in the past. She had to stay ahead, stay focused. If she let her guard down now, she'd risk losing everything. Mr. Carlton's voice cut through the silence. "Today we're going to discuss something a little more challenging." His eyes flickered to Ilara, his expression tight with barely concealed animosity. "Since we're all so fond of solving problems, let's see if Ilara can handle something a bit more advanced." He turned to the board and began writing down a new set of equations, far more complicated than anything Ilara had seen before. This wasn't just math, it was warfare. Calculus mixed with quantum physics, algorithms that twisted and folded into impossible shapes. Mr. Carlton's hands moved quickly, the chalk squeaking against the board like nails on a chalkboard. As he finished, he turned back toward the class, a knowing look in his eyes. "You have 10 minutes. Solve it." The challenge was a gauntlet. Ilara knew it, and Mr. Carlton knew it too. She could feel the weight of the entire class's gaze upon her. This time, it wasn't just a test of intellect. It was a test of her resolve. Could she prove herself again, or would the cracks in her victory from yesterday start to show? Ilara glanced down at the equations. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as her mind began to process the problem. Her hands twitched at the sides of her desk, and she exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in her chest. She couldn't help but notice the quiet murmurs from her classmates. Some were whispering, barely able to mask their curiosity. Others were outright skeptical, watching with eager eyes to see if she could pull it off again. "They think I won't do it," Ilara thought. "They think I'm a fluke." But she wasn't. She was better than that. The clock began ticking, and Ilara's mind went into overdrive. The equations were intricate, more complex than she expected, but there was something about the rhythm of the numbers that clicked in her mind. The formulas weren't a puzzle, they were a song, and she knew the notes. Her pencil danced across the paper, her calculations becoming a blur of motion. The room was silent now, except for the soft scratch of Ilara's pencil against the paper, the ticking of the clock, and the occasional cough from a nervous student. She could feel Mr. Carlton's eyes on her, could feel the judgment in every glance he shot her way. He had not expected her to succeed yesterday, and today he was doing everything in his power to make sure she wouldn't. But Ilara wasn't backing down, not this time. 5 minutes in, Ilara's mind raced ahead, calculating, verifying, adjusting. The solution was within her grasp. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The clock ticked down to the final minute. She looked up, meeting Mr. Carlton's eyes for a brief moment. He was standing at the front of the room, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk. His lips were pressed into a thin line, eyes hard, with something she couldn't quite read. Disdain? Worry? Ilara felt a spark of defiance rise within her. She wasn't just solving equations, she was dismantling an idea that only certain people like Mr. Carlton, had the right to control knowledge, to decide who could succeed and who would fail. I'm not just solving math, I'm taking back control, she thought. As the final seconds ticked down, Ilara took a deep breath and placed her pencil down. Done. She stood and walked to the front of the room, the entire class watching her, waiting for the inevitable showdown. She handed her paper to Mr. Carlton, who took it from her with a stiff nod. The silence stretched on as he scanned the answers. It felt like hours before he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're sure about this?" Ilara nodded, her eyes never leaving him. "Yes." Mr. Carlton glanced down at the paper again, a slight tremor in his hands. The class held its breath, and then without warning, Mr. Carlton's expression shifted. His eyes flicked up to meet hers, a mix of frustration and something else she couldn't quite place. But it didn't matter. He was defeated. Ilara's eyes flicked over to her classmates, who were now whispering amongst themselves. This time their whispers weren't filled with doubt. They were filled with awe. "Ilara Whittaker," Mr. Carlton said quietly, his voice barely audible. "You've done it again. I wasn't expecting this." Ilara smiled slightly, but her smile wasn't for him. It was for herself. She had done it. She had outsmarted him, outpaced him, and proved that no one, no teacher, no authority figure had the right to decide what she could or couldn't do. She wasn't just the shy, unnoticed student in the back of the room anymore. She was a force, and Mr. Carlton had just learned that the hard way. As Ilara turned to leave the front of the room, she couldn't help but smile. This time, the victory wasn't just about solving equations. It was about taking back what was rightfully hers. The battle for recognition was over, but the war for respect, that was just beginning. The day after Ilara Whittaker's triumph over Mr. Carlton, the school felt different. The air was charged, the atmosphere buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Whispers followed Ilara wherever she went, students exchanging glances and nods when she passed, as if they were in awe of something they didn't quite understand but couldn't ignore. Ilara sat in the back of her next class, trying her best to tune out the chatter around her. She wasn't here for attention. She had a job to do, and it was time to focus. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that her entire world had shifted overnight. But there was no time to reflect, not with the looming shadow of Mr. Carlton hanging over her. She could still see the way he had stared at her after she solved those impossible equations, the frustration in his eyes, the disbelief. He had underestimated her, and he wouldn't let it go. As class ended, Ilara gathered her things, moving toward the door. Just as her hand touched the handle, she heard the voice. "Ilara!" It was Mr. Carlton. His voice was cold, almost threatening. She turned slowly to face him. He stood near the front of the room, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. "I need to speak with you," he said. His words weren't a request, they were an order. Ilara hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped toward him. The classroom had emptied, leaving the two of them alone in the echoing silence. Mr. Carlton's eyes didn't leave hers as he motioned to the seat in front of him. She sat down, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. "Ilara," Mr. Carlton began, his voice tight, "I've been thinking about yesterday's challenge. You solved the equations, but that doesn't mean you won. You're still just a student, and you're not above the rules." Ilara didn't flinch. She had expected this. She had known that Mr. Carlton wouldn't accept her victory with grace. But there was something in his tone that made her heart race. It wasn't just pride, it was something darker, something that sent a chill down her spine. "I've decided to make things more interesting," he continued, his voice lowering. "Next week there will be another test, not just for you, but for everyone. But you will be given a special challenge, a real test of your skills. You can't hide behind luck this time." Ilara clenched her fists under the desk. The game had changed. He wasn't just testing her anymore, he was trying to break her. To prove that his way, his rules, were unshakable. She kept her gaze steady. "What are the rules?" Mr. Carlton smirked, the edge of arrogance creeping back into his expression. "Simple. You'll have to fix an engine, a real one, not some classroom model. It will be a challenge no one else can complete. If you fail, you'll prove you're nothing more than a flash of brilliance that doesn't last. But if you succeed, we'll see if you're really the genius you claim to be." Ilara's pulse quickened, a real engine, not a classroom assignment. She took a deep breath, then stood up. "You're not going to break me, Mr. Carlton," she said, her voice low but firm. For a moment Mr. Carlton's smirk faltered, just a flicker of doubt crossing his features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced with a cold, calculating smile. "We'll see, won't we?" The following days passed in a blur. Ilara barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming challenge. She knew that fixing an engine was one thing, but this was different. This would be a test of more than just her knowledge. It would be a test of her resolve, her ability to face what Mr. Carlton had designed to break her. But Ilara had something he didn't, her mother's legacy. Every night, Ilara pored over her mother's old notebooks, the ones that had been tucked away for so long. The ones filled with equations, blueprints, and designs that had been stolen from her. They had the answers, hidden in the symbols, in the notes her mother had left behind. Ilara would use them to fight back, not just for her mother, but for herself. She knew she was capable, but she also knew that Mr. Carlton had crafted this challenge specifically to undermine her. He wouldn't make it easy. It was the final day before the test. Ilara stood outside the school, the cool air biting at her skin. Her mind was sharp, focused, but the weight of the challenge ahead felt heavy. What if she failed? "You can't fail," she told herself. "You won't fail." Ilara's thoughts were interrupted by a voice, a familiar voice. "Ilara!" She turned to see one of her classmates, Sarah, walking toward her. Sarah had been one of the few who had supported her quietly, despite the skepticism of others. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked, her voice uncertain. "Mr. Carlton, he's not going to go easy on you." Ilara smiled faintly. "I've got this." "I know you do," Sarah said, her expression softening. "But just be careful, okay? There's something off about this challenge. Something's not right." Ilara nodded, but her resolve didn't waver. "I'm ready for whatever he throws at me." The day of the challenge arrived, and Ilara found herself standing in the school's auto shop, the smell of grease and oil thick in the air. Mr. Carlton stood next to a large, complex engine, a real one this time, with parts Ilara had never seen before. It was as intimidating as it was daunting. "Your time starts now," Mr. Carlton said, his voice cold and clinical. Ilara took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the eyes of the entire class on her. There was no turning back now. She opened the engine's casing and began to work. Her hands moved quickly, but her mind worked faster. She knew every bolt, every part, every calculation that needed to be made. She wasn't just solving this problem. She was proving that nothing could stop her. Minutes passed, and with each second the challenge became more intense. The weight of Mr. Carlton's gaze never left her, but she refused to let it distract her. She knew this engine. She could feel it. She wasn't just fixing it. She was unlocking its potential. And as the final piece clicked into place, the engine roared to life. She looked up, meeting Mr. Carlton's eyes, and in that moment, she knew she had won. The class was silent, and even Mr. Carlton stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. But Ilara didn't care. She had done it, and no one, least of all Mr. Carlton, could take that away from her. The battle was over, the war that had only just begun. The morning air felt different. It was the kind of crispness that made Ilara Whittaker feel alive, her mind racing as she stepped into the school building. Her victory in the auto shop was still fresh in her mind, but she couldn't help the gnawing feeling in her gut. The battle had escalated. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about what happened next. Mr. Carlton was relentless, and she knew he would come back with something even worse than before. The bell rang, signaling the start of class. Ilara walked into room 204, her heart pounding in her chest. She was already 5 steps ahead, already anticipating the challenge. But this time, she wasn't just going to solve a problem. She was going to expose the man who had underestimated her. Over and over again, Mr. Carlton stood at the front of the room, his posture rigid, his expression guarded. A piece of paper was in his hands, and the moment he saw Ilara enter, his eyes locked onto hers. There was something about his gaze that sent a cold shiver down her spine. He hadn't forgotten what happened last time. "Class," he said, his voice commanding. "Today we're going to do things a little differently. We're going to test the limits of our abilities. Ilara, I trust you're ready for another challenge." The way he said it, with that mocking edge, made the room tense. Ilara could feel her classmates' eyes flickering between them, the air thick with curiosity. Mr. Carlton didn't expect her to succeed, and they didn't either. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to her seat and sat down, her fingers twitching on the desk. The sound of her pulse in her ears was the only thing she could hear. But she wasn't afraid. Not this time. Mr. Carlton's voice cut through her thoughts. "You'll have a real test today. No formulas, no easy fixes. This time, it's an experiment, a machine of my own design. You'll have to figure it out, without using any of your precious books, your notes, or the crutch of theory." A collective murmur rose from the class, some students eyeing each other nervously. Mr. Carlton's challenge was designed to trap her. He wasn't just testing her intellect. He was testing her ability to think on her feet, to innovate under pressure. The machine stood before her, a tangle of wires, springs, and pulleys. It was ugly in its complexity, a chaotic mess of parts that made even the most seasoned engineers hesitate. It was a puzzle designed for failure, but that's exactly what he wants, Ilara thought. He's betting that I can't solve it. The clock on the wall ticked, its steady rhythm like the beat of a drum, counting down to the moment of truth. "I'll give you 15 minutes, Mr. Carlton said, his tone still dripping with that same irritating superiority. "No more, no less. You won't get a second chance. Fail, and you'll go down in front of everyone." His words cut deeper than he realized, but Ilara refused to let it show. She stood, brushing off the whisper of doubt, trying to creep into her thoughts, and moved toward the machine. Her hands touched the cold metal, and she closed her eyes for just a second. She could feel the heat of the moment rising, but she wouldn't let it consume her. "Think," she told herself, "break it down, step by step." The machine didn't scare her. It was a challenge, yes, but it wasn't an obstacle she couldn't overcome. It was just another puzzle, just another problem to solve. She leaned over, examining the pieces carefully. There was a missing link, a small but critical error that Mr. Carlton had overlooked. It's always the small things, Ilara thought, her mind slipping into focus. The first 5 minutes passed in a blur of motion. Her hands moved quickly, almost instinctively. She could hear Mr. Carlton's footfalls behind her, his eyes on her every move, waiting for the slip-up. But Ilara wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. Every twist of the wrench, every adjustment of the screws, was deliberate. Her mind ran through calculations, anticipating the next step, always one move ahead. She had already seen the pattern. The springs were too tight, the wiring misaligned. It wasn't about brute force, it was about precision. With 10 minutes left, she had the machine partially functioning. She could hear the faint hum of the gears, beginning to turn, the pulse of energy slowly coming to life. The class was still. The tension was unbearable, but Ilara didn't falter. She adjusted a final wire, calibrated the power source, and with one last twist of her hand, the machine powered on completely. It was working. Mr. Carlton's eyes flickered, his expression shifting from disdain to disbelief. The students gasped, their eyes wide as they watched the machine function flawlessly. Ilara stepped back, wiping the sweat from her brow, her chest heaving with adrenaline. She turned to face Mr. Carlton, who was frozen in place, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Ilara," he began, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. How? How did you—" She held his gaze, unflinching. "I told you I could do it. I'm not here by luck, Mr. Carlton." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, a ripple of applause began to build, starting from one student, then another, until the entire class was clapping. Ilara didn't look at them. She didn't need their applause. She had already won. Mr. Carlton stood frozen, his arrogance shattered. His power, the control he thought he had over her, was gone. He couldn't hide it. His authority had been broken. "I don't need to prove anything to you anymore," Ilara said, her voice steady, almost kind. "I think I've already shown you who's in charge here." She gathered her things, her eyes locking onto Mr. Carlton for just a second longer. He didn't respond. He couldn't. As she walked out of the room, she felt the shift. It wasn't just a victory over a machine. It was a victory over everything he had ever tried to impose on her. She had done it. And for the first time, Ilara wasn't just the underdog. She was the one in control. Ilara Whittaker stood at the back of the classroom, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The engine that had been her battleground yesterday now sat quietly on the workbench, a symbol of her triumph, but she could still feel the sharp, lingering tension in the air. She hadn't expected everything to resolve so easily, but here she was, watching as Mr. Carlton, once the pillar of authority, was beginning to unravel. His face, usually set in a constant expression of smug superiority, was now pinched with uncertainty, and Ilara had no intention of letting him off easy. It had been a day of quiet whispers, hidden glances, and uncertain words. Her classmates, who had once ignored her, now watched her with a mixture of awe and respect. The silent judgment that had always followed her was now replaced with something unfamiliar: admiration. As the bell rang, signaling the start of another class, Ilara didn't immediately take her seat. Instead, she stood at the back of the room, her gaze fixed on Mr. Carlton. She could sense that he was about to make his move. This wasn't the end. No, he was going to make sure there was another challenge, a final test, to ensure he could somehow regain his position of power. "Ilara," Mr. Carlton called, his voice cutting through the class. His gaze lingered on her with a strange, unsettling intensity. Ilara's heart didn't race this time. She was done being afraid. She had faced the worst of him and come out victorious. "Yes?" she asked, her voice steady. Mr. Carlton's eyes flickered with something Ilara couldn't quite place: regret, anger. His lips curled into a tight smile, almost as if he were trying to hide the turmoil inside. "I hope you're ready for the real test, Ilara," he said, his tone lower than usual. Ilara's gaze didn't leave his face. "I'm always ready," she replied, her voice firm. Mr. Carlton didn't flinch. Instead, he walked toward her, holding out a folded piece of paper. "You've proven yourself with engines, Ilara, but this is different. The real world isn't a classroom. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and I want to see how—" "Well, you really can think on your feet." Ilara took the paper, unrolling it slowly. It was a set of new equations, longer, more complicated, more chaotic than anything she'd faced before. Her eyes scanned the page. This wasn't just a simple test. This was designed to break her. Mr. Carlton leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Solve it in front of the class, and I'll admit you're more than just a lucky guesser. Fail, and, well, let's just say your reputation here won't be what you think it is." Ilara didn't blink. She could hear the challenge in his words, the hidden bitterness he could no longer contain. It was personal now. Without missing a beat, she walked to the front of the room, ignoring the sudden quiet that descended on her classmates. The pressure was palpable, but Ilara had faced worse. The weight of the entire school wasn't on her shoulders, only the weight of her own potential. As she stood before the class, Ilara placed the paper on the desk and picked up the chalk. The clock on the wall began ticking, marking the seconds that could either validate her or break her. Her mind began to work, breaking down the equations, isolating the variables, and finding the connections between them. She could hear the whispers of doubt from behind her. Her classmates didn't believe she could do it again. Mr. Carlton's skeptical gaze bore down on her like a hawk on prey. But Ilara couldn't afford to care. This was her moment, and nothing else mattered. The numbers twisted and folded in her mind as she worked, each step becoming more fluid, more intuitive. She was beyond the challenge now. She was rewriting it. There was no puzzle she couldn't solve, no barrier she couldn't shatter. Every equation felt like a second nature, a rhythm she'd learned long ago. The clock ticked relentlessly, but Ilara was unbothered. As the final few seconds of the test slipped away, she stepped back, her chalk landing with a quiet thunk on the board. The class was dead silent. Ilara turned to face Mr. Carlton, her eyes steady. "Done," she said, the word barely more than a whisper, but carrying the weight of the universe. The room stayed still, suspended in a moment of breathless anticipation. Mr. Carlton walked up to the board, his eyes scanning her work. There was no sign of triumph on his face, only disbelief. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked at Ilara, then back at the equations, as if they had somehow betrayed him. This doesn't make sense," Mr. Carlton muttered almost to himself. "How?" Ilara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence hang, the tension thickening. Finally, she spoke, her voice unwavering. "It's not luck, Mr. Carlton. It's understanding." She paused for a beat, letting the words sink in. "And it's about time you realized that." His face flushed, a mix of anger and humiliation flickering in his eyes. But Ilara wasn't done. "You may have taught this class, Mr. Carlton, but today it was me who taught you." The class erupted into whispers, some in awe, others in shock. The power had shifted once again, but this time Ilara wasn't the student proving herself. She was the teacher, and Mr. Carlton had just been schooled. She turned and walked out of the room, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the now silent classroom. The battle was over. The bell rang, and Ilara Whittaker stepped into the hall, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of calm, a kind of quiet satisfaction. She had done it. She had defeated Mr. Carlton. No tricks, no luck, just raw, unfiltered intellect. Her classmates still murmured about her victory. Whispers followed her through the halls, admiration mixed with disbelief, but Ilara didn't care about the praise anymore. What mattered was that she had finally shown them all. Her intelligence wasn't a fluke. She wasn't a shadow to hide. In doubt, the world had been underestimating her for far too long. As she walked to her locker, Ilara's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting another text from her classmate Sarah, who had been supportive throughout this whole ordeal. Instead, it was a notification from the school website. "Special announcement, Mr. Carlton suspended from teaching." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the headline again. Suspended. A rush of confusion flooded her mind. How could this happen? It felt like the ground beneath her feet had shifted once again. Mr. Carlton wasn't just an arrogant teacher anymore. He had become the antagonist in this battle, the one trying to hold power over her and everyone else. But now he was gone. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. "Did you see the news? It's all over the school board. They're saying Mr. Carlton had been involved in questionable practices for years. It's not just about the tests. He's been manipulating students' grades, pushing his own agenda. This is huge, Ilara." Ilara stared at the screen, her mind reeling. The image of Mr. Carlton, smug and self-assured, now seemed like a carefully constructed lie. Behind that veneer was someone who had been using his position to control and belittle, and who had underestimated the wrong person. Her. Is this what it all meant? She had thought it was about proving herself, proving her intelligence, but now she understood. Her victory wasn't just about solving a problem. It was about exposing the lies, the manipulation, and the arrogance that had held her back. Ilara stood frozen, absorbing the weight of the situation. It was over. Mr. Carlton had fallen. The quiet girl from the back of the classroom had finally taken a stand. Just then, a familiar face appeared in the hallway. It was Leonard, one of her classmates, who had been a quiet observer during the tests. He had always seemed to be on the fence, unsure of who to side with, but now he walked up to her, a look of respect in his eyes. "Ilara," Leonard said, his voice softer than usual. "I just wanted to say, you were incredible. We all knew. Mr. Carlton was tough, but none of us saw this coming. You didn't just beat him. You showed us all something. You showed us what real strength looks like. You didn't need to bow to him." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her. It wasn't the kind of recognition she had sought, but it felt like the kind of validation she hadn't known she needed. This was what mattered. The support of those who had seen her not as the quiet girl in the back, but as someone who had the ability to change everything. "You were right," Ilara replied, her voice steady. "It was never about the engine or the math. It was about taking control of my own story." Leonard nodded. "You gave us all something to think about, and not just about math or machines, but about how we let people like him push us down." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the school bustling around them, but neither of them moved. The weight of the past few weeks was beginning to settle in, but it wasn't oppressive. It was freeing. As the day wore on, Ilara couldn't help but feel like the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. The underdog had triumphed. Mr. Carlton's suspension was only the beginning, and though she didn't know exactly what would happen next, she felt a spark of hope that had been dormant for so long. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the quiet girl in the back. Ilara was a force, one who would not be silenced, not by authority, not by arrogance, and certainly not by anyone who thought they could control her. By the time the final bell rang, Ilara had made up her mind. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. She walked out of the school, head held high, ready for whatever came next. The morning after Mr. Carlton's suspension, Ilara found herself standing outside the school, a strange sense of calm washing over her. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The battle was over. She had won, not just against Mr. Carlton, but against the system that had spent so long trying to break her. But even as she stood there, her heart still raced with excitement. The ripple effects of the events had spread through the school like wildfire. Ilara could feel the weight of it all. Her victory wasn't just about the equations or the machines. It was about something bigger. It was about changing the way people saw her, and maybe, just maybe, changing the way they saw themselves. It was a victory, yes, but the journey was far from over. As she entered the school that morning, the halls felt different. The walls seemed a little less imposing, the faces a little less judgmental. She noticed how some of her classmates, those who had once ignored her or scoffed at her quiet demeanor, now offered small, respectful nods. A few even smiled. Ilara, for the first time in her life, was no longer invisible. Her mind kept drifting. Back to the moment she had stood in front of Mr. Carlton, hands shaking as she solved that impossible equation. His face, the way it had gone from smug superiority to confusion and humiliation. She couldn't shake the image of it. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered triumph. But the real power wasn't in the moment itself. It was in what came after. By lunch, the entire school seemed to be talking about her. She could hear the whispers, the rumors, the stories. Ilara had been the girl who defeated Mr. Carlton, and that story was spreading faster than wildfire. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, her quiet but loyal classmate. She had been one of the first to understand Ilara's potential, one of the few who had quietly rooted for her through it all. "Did you see the news?" Sarah's text read. "There's a viral thread going around about you. People are calling you the math genius of the school. Some are even saying you're going to be offered a scholarship. I swear it's everywhere. You've become a legend." Ilara read the text over and over again, a mixture of disbelief and wonder flooding her chest. A scholarship? She hadn't even considered the possibility. It seemed impossible, unreal. She was just a girl who loved math and engines. Was she really on the verge of something like that? Could her future really be shifting so quickly? Just then, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Leonard, the classmate who had witnessed her challenge with Mr. Carlton and quietly supported her along the way. His face was filled with something new, respect, maybe even awe. "You did it, Ilara," Leonard said softly. "You've changed everything." Ilara nodded, though she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to this kind of praise. "I just solved the problems," she replied, keeping her voice casual, though inside her chest tightened with the weight of the moment. "I didn't expect all of this." Leonard smiled. "Well, it's more than just the problems, right? It's what you did with them. You showed everyone what real intelligence looks like." Ilara didn't have an answer to that. Her mind was still buzzing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. But Leonard's words stuck with her. She had done more than just solve equations. She had exposed something deeper, something that ran under the surface of her. School, her peers, and even her teachers. She had shown them that intelligence wasn't about proving superiority. It was about understanding, about taking what was hidden and bringing it to light. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the school's quiet halls, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened it. It was from a prestigious engineering university, one she had never dared dream of applying to. They had seen her viral success. They had seen her work. And now, they were offering her a full scholarship. Ilara stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as she read the words. The scholarship, the future she had only ever imagined in her wildest dreams, was now within her reach. The thought of it overwhelmed her. But in the midst of the excitement, one thought settled in her mind. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Ilara Whittaker wasn't just a quiet girl in the back of the classroom anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, and the world was finally starting to take notice. The engine, the formulas, the challenge, they were all part of her story now. But what mattered most was that she had proved herself. And there was nothing more powerful than that. As she walked toward the exit of the school, she looked up at the sky, the clouds stretching out above her, and for the first time, she felt truly free. The world had underestimated her, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Ilara Whittaker stood at the edge of the school courtyard, the cool breeze ruffling her hair as she stared out into the horizon. The world around her felt different, as though the earth had shifted beneath her feet in the past few weeks. From the quiet, overlooked girl in the back of the class, she had transformed into something else, something unstoppable. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat as she read the text from Sarah. "Guess who's in the news now? Your scholarship offer is going viral. You're being interviewed by a major tech journal, Ilara. The story's spreading everywhere." They want to hear your side of the engine challenge, how you beat Carlton, everything. Ilara blinked, her breath catching in her chest. It was all happening so fast. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from the school principal. Ilara, congratulations on your success. We've been following your progress, and we'd love to invite you to a special school board meeting to discuss future opportunities. We're interested in featuring you as a representative for a new initiative. Ilara exhaled slowly, her mind reeling. The recognition, the opportunities, the scholarship, everything she'd once dreamed about now felt within reach. But none of it could erase the core of what had driven her, proving herself not just to Mr. Carlton, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. Her victory was about more than just solving equations. It was about defying expectations, about showing the world that intelligence was more than just theory, and that a quiet girl in the back of the room could change everything. But the challenge wasn't over. As the recognition came flooding in, Ilara knew there would always be people like Mr. Carlton, people who resented the truth being exposed, people who would fight to keep the power in their hands. Her thoughts drifted back to the day Mr. Carlton had first mocked her, the way he'd brushed her off with his arrogance, but that mockery had been his downfall. His overconfidence, his refusal to see her potential had led to his humiliation. It wasn't just about the equation she solved, it was about the way she had flipped the power dynamic, making it clear that no one was untouchable. Not even him, Ilara. The voice startled her, and she turned to find Sarah standing a few feet away, a grin on her face. "You're everywhere today," Sarah said, holding up her phone, showing Ilara the trending article about her. "People can't stop talking about you. The engine girl, you're a legend." Ilara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I didn't ask for all of this. I just wanted to be seen for who I am, not who people think I am." Sarah's grin faded, and she stepped closer. "You did more than that. You took the power back. You exposed the truth. You changed the narrative." The words hit Ilara harder than she expected. She had always been afraid of being seen, afraid of what would happen if someone truly looked at her and saw what she was capable of. But now, standing here, with Sarah's words echoing in her ears, Ilara realized something important. This was only the beginning. For the first time, Ilara felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. The quiet girl was gone, the girl who had hidden. Her intelligence, her brilliance had finally emerged, and she wasn't going back, not anymore. "Maybe," Ilara said, her voice steady, "but there's still a lot of work to do. I'm not finished yet." Sarah nodded, her eyes lighting up. "What's next for you?" Ilara paused, taking in the weight of the question. She had never thought this far ahead, never dared to. But now, with the scholarship offer, the interviews, and the possibility of something greater on the horizon, she saw the path opening before her. It was wide, it was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. "I don't know yet," Ilara admitted, smiling, "but I'll figure it out, one step at a time." As she turned to leave, Sarah called out to her, "Hey, Ilara, you've already changed everything. Now go change the world." And for the first time, Ilara felt the spark of something bigger than just the school, bigger than any engine or equation. The world was ready for her. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She was going to show them what she was truly capable of, and no one was going to stop her.